Oh geez, it might just be time to piss off the Fire Red and Leaf Green fanbase. Because as a consequence of my last Fire Red and Leaf Green video, it turns out I'm a compromised source of information, running on nostalgia, incapable of properly reviewing a game, because style beats substance every time, apparently. While not exactly an over-exaggeration, it's nothing short as the perfect incentive for me to simply do better, and analyze the games to the best of my ability regardless of what the end result is, good or bad. Digging through every aspect of the game we possibly can, because let's be real, Gen 3 really needs it. Fire Red and Leaf Green especially do. Alright, let's begin, because frankly put, this one's gonna sting a bit for something I kinda like. Kicking off the adventure, we are once again greeted by our old friend, the Kanto region, in a new glory, or what barely passes as so, as here Kanto returns mostly as you knew it before. The region, unfortunately plagued by a never-ending sea of grasslands and ledges with dungeons sprinkled in, only really sees revisions in a few areas, typically just becoming a little bit wider to walk through, if at all. Once again, leaving us with a region that in a gameplay sense has good ideas, but the implementation leaves it gasping for air. Strengths with plenty of out-of-the-way areas to explore, a post-game dungeon that stares you down the entire game, and a point of no return that truthfully gets unraveled too soon, and bits of non-linearity allowing for unique routing across many runs of the game, which, while cool, ends up causing massive problems in the EXP department. But let's be real, mandatory trainer counts also contribute to this problem. But as far as the layout itself goes, mainland Kanto as a play space, despite the lack of diversity, is fine. Thankfully this time, it's not all we're left with. As completely detached from the mainland, we're given the Sevi Islands for even more play space, which, considering how short Kanto itself can be, adding more alongside it can help quite a bit. And I picked that wording because these areas are entirely detached from the main region, both gameplay-wise and geographically speaking. But here among these islands, the variety is all over the place. From islands that almost structure as a single town and nothing else, to that of long stretches to adventure over, featuring several dungeons making up for how repetitive the main areas can be. From additional forests and ice caves to a volcano, a cave necessitating that you learn Braille, many water routes, the most accurate beaches we've had thus far, and most importantly, verticality not tied exclusively to ledges that you hop down. Right? Adding more play space in general is one thing, and a positive at that, but the timing in which you access it is the game changer, with 3 of the islands being accessible during the main game, while the other 4 get opened up in the post-game. Well, let me remind you that this post-game was one that previously only consisted of a single cave. With this addition, the post-game content increases quite a bit. That part's obvious. But the real benefit is the fact that quite a bit of these islands remain optional during their story sections, including a small piece of 1 island, half of 2 island, about 60% of 5 island, half of 6 island, and the entirety of 7 island, right? So far, everything's swell, but when we dip our toes into the overall mechanics side of things, the game does tend to get a bit better, just with a blemish that really couldn't be covered up. That issue is sadly seen in fast travel. Much like the Gen 2 games, our issue comes from trying to fly between separate maps just simply not being possible, and in a way the implementation is both worse and better here. Worse because there's 4 different maps you can't freely fly between, but better in comparison to Gold, Silver, and Crystal, as the areas in question aren't as strong hotspots as an entire extra region was. But if fast travel is needed, boat travel is required to bridge that gap, and it doesn't take too much time to walk towards that hub to access the other areas, making the act of island travel a bit less painful on travel that's already unnecessarily extra. With navigation becoming a bit funky thanks to the Sevi Islands, some modernization was made to progressing through the region. Okay, it's just the swapping of a generic item being needed for the game progression, now swapped out for a key item instead. Same town, different spot that's not too obvious to find. Unfortunately, suffering from that Gen 1 philosophy of just go find and talk to everyone you can, but of course it's different from the original, so it's going to be noted here. Otherwise, HMs are where the progression gets a little bit more weird. Cuts still being gotten with story progress, Surf and Strength with their ties to the Safari Zone, Fly in a random house, with Flash being locked behind a Pokedex completion reward off in the middle of nowhere. The changes from Gen 1 are actually the additions of HMs being Rock Smash and Waterfall. Rock Smash being completely optional due to being buried away on a random NPC on 1 island, and Waterfall being a post-game pickup in the middle of its plot. Thankfully, not being a pitiful example of just know where they are, bro, or talk to everyone in the game, please, not making the game much more of a headache. In fact, headaches are an issue that get remedied quite a bit in terms of our non-battling gameplay catch-up, as one of Gen 3's most revolutionary introductions was the running shoes. Now present in Kanto makes traveling around the many outdoor areas and dungeons noticeably faster, just making you wish the damn thing wasn't unlocked after the first gym. Which, while not exactly fixed from our first nor second trips to Kanto, the bag rework of Gen 2 allows for more indirect storage with your inventory, as dedicated pockets for key items and Pokeballs now exist, even featuring further sub-menus for TMs and berries, meaning unlike Gen 1, you can carry an absolute load of items at all times. But the dedicated tab for regular items are why we're here, because for some reason none of the Gen 3 games share a count. So Ruby and Sapphire have 20 slots, Emerald snuck by with 30, meanwhile Fire Red and Leaf Green for some reason gets 42? This, alongside organized pockets that can fit all of their regular item types in it, means unlike the Gen 1 games, you are almost never gonna need to attempt to pick up an item just to get blocked by an inventory cap, since now in these games the item cap is arguably too high to be capped naturally, almost making the PC's item storage irrelevant, although it still matters. Kind of fixing one of the most dreadful common interactions that plagued our previous Kanto adventure. But finally, we've got one last difference for this section, and for our Gen 1 to 3 Kantoing, nothing's different, but as building blocks, mechanically speaking, absolutely an outlier. Okay, so here's Gen 2 during day, and now here's Gen 2 during night. Okay, so here's the Hoenn trio during day, alongside the Hoenn trio during night. Nothing's different, but mechanically something's here. Now here's Fire Red and Leaf Green. No day, no night, hell, there's not even a battery in the cartridge. Time is in fact at a standstill here, and while it's nice that things like the encounter table can be more simplistic, there's issues. For starters, time-based evolutions are completely inaccessible, meaning 2 of Eevee's evolutions just can't be gotten without trading at all. But some time-based activities from other games, in this case berries, are no longer tied to a long bloated time sink, but now just respawning on a footstep counter and luck basis on their hidden tiles, technically making them faster to farm. But of course you can't choose what's grown, and there's already something tied to each berry tile, exclusively locked to berry forests for berries specifically. Technically there are other respawning items, but let's be real, the Lumberry is truly the only one that matters, and it's actually present here. That, fellas and fellettes, is what makes up our new Kanto overworld gameplay. Here we got an extra play space, importantly giving us more to do in post-game, mechanical updates that make playing the world more enjoyable, and just more to make Fire Red and Leaf Green a more modernized experience. Going into Gen 3, the Kanto games have a lot to catch up on. While we sadly lose most of the Gen 1 jank and charm in the process, the Gen 3-ification of the game's mechanics is absolutely a great way to improve the overall experience. The laundry list in question injects roughly 25 new or edited mechanics, potentially even more than what I've got for you here today. So gamers, why not come on down to Kanto in Gen 3? Since your last visit, we've got the likes of 2 new typings, with next to no relevance during the main game, now even featuring type chart alterations, meant to nerf the formerly Uber Beedrill into a status of fair and balanced. Try abilities as a mixed bag of viability altering madness, from turning Diglett into a reminder to buy repels, to Gengar having a ground immunity, rest in peace, to even the greatest offensive menace having stall properties. Depth in Mons has truly never been more back. And for some reason, this is the only normal trip to Kanto to have it. Don't worry, held items are also here in exclusivity for Kanto, although the numbers are a little bit concerning. More on that later. Try double battles dispersed in a lacking supply, so you can't really enjoy the superior battle format in the generation where Mons switch in after death mid-turn. Try a new EV system that, while better in a vacuum, leads to your Pokemon for this playthrough being weaker across the board compared to Gen 1. No, but guys, it's fine. Pokerus is here to pretend to save the day by speeding up the process of gaining EVs while you get salty over an anomaly that's rarer than shiny Pokemon. Try an edited IV system where you've got double the potential numbers to hit just to miss out on optimization instead. Try a standardized crit rate of 1 in 16 rather than the speed-based crits that allowed some mons to have guaranteed crit. crits, some of which were formerly sabotaged by. But of course now your offensive stat boosts aren't ignored when critting. Yes, Big Stall Register trademark is getting overthrown. Try the once per save file edition of a roamer being the RNG hell that even when you commit to grinding this hemorrhoid out, you're still forfeiting your Master Ball for it. Try a Pokemon that doesn't give a care in the world which game you're playing, as it's always displaying its normal form in a generation where its actual form is game dependent, quite literally giving you the wrong information in PvP play. Also, it makes playing Fire Red optimal. Try the addition of genders for microscopic attack interactions. Try friendship, but since it's Gen 3, the process of grinding it up takes more time than grinding for the red battle in Hard Gold Soul Silver. Try passive damage, but instead of it happening after the mon's action, it's at the end of the turn. Try enemy items happening at the start of a turn rather than on their Pokemon's action. Try not being locked out of attacking when getting hit by trapping moves. Try the public execution of the 1 in 256 chance to just miss any attack, no matter how accurate. So now when Fissure misses, you will have one less excuse to blame it on. Try the addition of weathers so Tyranitar can actually leave its title of Potential Mon for Himothy instead. Try entry hazards. Ew! Try enemy trainers actually having PP on their Pokemon, so PP stalling the extremely easy NPC battles is actually a strategy now. Try status condition edits, like Burn becoming stronger from some reason, while Freeze and Fast Sleep users stop becoming auto win cons. Try the damn special stat being two different stats, so the rich being richer, Mewtwo and his nonsensical 154 special attack, also doubling his bulk, is just a cruel memory. And lastly, a continuation of the PC overhaul. Look man, if ditching the bad menus without Pokemon icons and clunky movement for one that's the exact opposite wasn't enough, now even featuring both a multi-select for fast menuing and a move items tab to get those around faster. The big revolutionary change they have here from Gen 1 is now preventing you from being locked out of catching Pokemon entirely because you didn't swap to an empty box before forgetting to save and then permanently miss out on catching Moltres. Because now not only can you catch the Pokemon, it's also going straight to the next box. Beautiful. This, gamers, is what sets Fire Red and Leaf Green apart from the originals. Come on down for what should be a grandiose time, only really plagued by the lack of a Gen 4 physical special split, and that of the main experience. But first, a detour. Now that we've seen what the Gen 3 brings this iteration of Kanto, it's worth asking, does Fire Red and Leaf Green bring anything mechanically unique to the table? Yes, although it's not much. The one single change is actually bad for the game, and unfortunately where the game's fire begins to fade quality-wise. As here, evolution is changed, and it's got a dagger that's putting up to the back of the new Pokemon introduced since our previous Kanto journey. As here, in our game where, spoilers, our regional Pokedex consists of only Kanto Pokemon, if anything tries to evolve into one of a different generation, the evolution will be very maliciously auto-cancelled, meaning all these flashy evolutions are essentially off the table entirely. Okay, sure, it's one thing for some of these items to just be unavailable during the main game, like the Sunstone, the King's Rock, or the Metal Coat, right? BDSP took inspiration from something, right? Even when these items that could have been farmable were actually taken away as previously held items by wild Pokemon, right? Sure. In normal play, you're never gonna have a chance for these mons, but it certainly crosses a line when friendship evolutions get involved as something that you would likely run into in normal play. Being locked out of those feel painful since the game is completely rejecting new playables in favor of maintaining the 150 agenda. Under circumstances that can naturally happen with no issue, which really just limits the game in terms of actual reasons to play it, because you don't have new Pokemon. But then gamers, we've got the part where the devs just light you on fire for no particular reason, because this evolution blocking nonsense isn't just limited to Kanto Pokemon, but even that of the Johto and Hoenn Pokemon that you can't even normally get. Yeah, if you had the gall to trade in some random victim of the Hoenn special thinking that you can actually use the damn thing, I have awful news for you. Since this too can't evolve, you will use the original 150 and you will like it or cry about it, which is just flat out awful restrictions that you're simply forced to deal with. Yes, gamers, Cascoon is something that needs to have its evolution restricted. Okay, actually, there is a loophole in this rule. If you have a Johto Pokemon capable of evolving into a Kanto Pokemon, they get evolved as if this little barrier doesn't exist. Despite the headaches, thankfully, this feature isn't permanent. As to remove it, all you gotta do is simply unlock the National Pokedex, which requires you to beat the game, meaning you no longer have a need for these Pokemon since the game is already beat. And you gotta have your Pokedex caught count at 60, which at best is a time sink that costs you Pokeball funds, at least making the Dex completion rewards a freebie, or at worst, a time sink requiring you to level up stuff that you've got no intention of using, burning the time that we pretend to have. Also, you can get Pokemon that now with the game beat, you're not gonna use. Anyways, cool, that's it. The evolution handcuffs that make it feel insulting to simply play, since it just keeps the offering of mons for you to use the exact same as the first time around, which is problematic for what's already a pretty repetitive offering. It really begs the question on how well the lineup holds on. Not very well. When it finally comes time to plug the gameplay mechanics into the playthrough offering, the bite digging into your shoulder certainly begins to clamp down. To see that in action, the regional Pokedex, as briefly mentioned, is struggling because it's the exact same as Red and Blue at a measly 150. 149 if we take off the post-game exclusive, and another 4 if we want to ignore the new side content for those Pokemon that previously weren't staring down an eviction notice. Take them out and then we're down to a count that is actually lower than that of the OG games. Otherwise, matching perfectly because, of course, the new evolutions are off the table, which covers us up to the National Dex inclusive post-game offering, which brings the count of obtainables all the way up to 212. +1 for the last Kantomon, +2 for the relevant Hoenn babies, +8 for the Johto babies in the Hitmontop babysitting them, +9 for the main game ban list of evolutions of Kanto Pokemon that are now legal, and of course, +42 for the rest of the Johto reverse power creep. All of this will combine together in an effort to crank up the catchable lineup, but sadly still suffer variety-wise in the enemy department, since of course the main game enemy supply is mostly untouched, so the only real diversity that is injected in really just comes down to the new double battles and the post-game. Although the latter somehow struggles quite a bit, suffering from repeat mons out the wazoo, with new sites being pretty uncommon. Which, of course, the worst offenders of not having good Pokemon variety will be the returning boss trainers, since outside of a single battle, their Pokemon are just untouched as far as the lineup is concerned. The different battle being an unrelated nerf to Giovanni's gym leader team, since they devolved his most impactful Pokemon for something that is spammed significantly more. Hurt worse, especially as it's now a duplicate, just hurting variety in one spot for no reason, especially as quite a few of these gym leader teams actually needed work, as was the case in the OG games. Sabrina's team isn't monotyped, featuring a random Venomoth. Koga has a random duped Coughing in a game packed with other poison options. Lorelei having a non-ice type, but let's be real, the Slowbro does make the team better. Bruno still having 2 random Onyxes, when 2 other fighting types actually exist. Agatha still maintains an unevolved Haunter on her mono poison team, while of course having 2 duplicate Gengars to rub salt in the wound. Sitting here cackling at the disgrace that is Lance, who features 2 unevolved Dragonair alongside 2 Pokemon that aren't even dragons. Not like it's even possible to crank that number up in the first place, since there's only 1 dragon line in the entire game, with Agatha's supposed ghost proficiency in the same questionable boat. That part hasn't changed. So far, that's just what the opponents have. We just mentioned the fact that you only get 1 option for ghosts and dragons. But the new types of Steel and Dark, on the other hand, yikes. Steel also matches those 2 types with 1 option through Magneton, and Dark, gamers, get this. There are exactly 0 Dark types for you to use in the regional dex, so you literally have no options. 4 entire typings, giving you absolute grief through their inability to hit more than a single option, not even existing in Dark's case. Like, this is just dreadful. But no, dude, use one of the 13 poison types. They really need the attention. But if the typings of your tools weren't a headache to deal with, the failed redemption arc of the game's level curve absolutely is. From the start, with you hitting about 4 trainers on average before Brock, the game just expects you to magically gather enough levels to challenge a level 14 cap, once again featuring featuring an optional rival fight that you're never winning without fighting your way to Brock just to turn around, because simply put, this section doesn't really have enough XP. Gym 2 wants 21, being a weird level jump that's trying to decide the freedom of choice between Nugget Bridge now or later for you. The bump for Gym 3 wanting 24 is reasonable. Gym 4 wanting 29 is again reasonable, especially the Rocket Hideout and Lavender Tower being doable before or after the gym for easy XP. Gyms 5 and 6 are where the ball is dropped, with a massive level jump by 14, leaving the goal at 43 despite being a massive jump that almost necessitates doing all of Silph.Co, both sections of the freedom of choice pathing to Fuchsia through both the Snorlax blocked routes to not catch up EXP wise at all, because it's around this point where you're probably running a full team or close to it. Your Mons are going to be starved. With exactly 0 mandatory trainers, the +4 levels the game asks you for to take on Gym 7 just feels like the optionals are becoming mandatory, especially when the gym puzzle would encourage you to not engage with them at all. Lastly, leaves Gym 8 with a cap of 50, just 3 higher from the last, which if the Sevi Islands are on the table, then fair, although without, yeah, the levels may be pushing it, although surf access will surely alleviate the struggle. Lastly, leaving us with the Elite Four grind. From 50, the game wants you to duke it out with levels up to 63, which, yes, to give the game its props, shaving 2 levels off of what Red and Blue had is a positive, but with the Elite Four level ladder being 12 levels wide, there's never a real good level range for you to take your team in with, without of course making either a cakewalk out of the early fights, or making the latter ones harder than they actually are just because the game expects you to grind unless you run 1 or 2 Mons for the game's entire runtime, because it's just never enough EXP. Even if the game offers quite a bit more EXP in general, just thanks to some revamped teams, more trainers, or of course brand new content. Which, speaking of the Sevi Islands, oh boy, this is content that's locked off until post Blaine. You know, a cap of 47, with low 40s flooding his party. The fact that we're only building off the gym trainers by packing down 1 in 3 island with mid to high 30s just really isn't cutting it, since, like the gym trainers, they're roughly 5 levels behind where they're genuinely needed, especially when the wild Pokemon can compete with them, under level, or even over level them. Luckily for the islands, it is enough for your pre-Giovanni grind, probably, so despite it not being at the proper goalpost, it can do its job when you fight the optionals. Although when we roll over to the post game, the ball begins to disintegrate within your hands, although that's mostly an abysmal first impression with the Mount Ember Rocket grunts just matching that of the main game trainers in the Sevi Islands as seemingly a complete afterthought, piggybacked by the Icefall Cave Rocket grunt keeping the same level range, but now in a true post-game area, where the wild Pokemon are either significantly under-leveled or over-leveling the trainers just because. Where of course the rest of the post-game areas, the wild Pokemon will either rival the trainers or just under-level them, because of course the trainer levels are actually fixed in these areas. The issue with under-leveling, by the way, is the fact that these are mostly a sabotaged lineup of the new post-game Johto Pokemon, just like Gen 2, locked behind the Hall of Fame, making them damn near impossible to use, requiring God knows how much time to get to a workable state. Meaning, whoa, no way, a cool Pokemon I could catch and never use, unless I want to make it a full-time job to level it up. At least Cerulean Cave isn't suffering as much as the Sevi Islands, only really suffering from a little bit of wild level disparities for the floor encounters, while the post-game exclusives, being Wobbuffet and Mewtwo, are actually ready to go for E4 Round 2, while just generally being in a very reasonable place to grind levels in general, as at least one shred of light in this dark, damp tunnel of a level curve, mostly, if anything, hurt by all the unevolved spam in late game, hurting EXP yields more than the actual enemy levels do. Sadly, still encouraging grinding, since most of the main game's level curve issues went unaddressed. They just threw more optional content at you. While that covers most of the focus of the replayability factors, we've still got a few things to touch on to help the game's rebound just a little bit to better the experience. For instance, the introduction of a move deleter allows this trip to Kanto to actually have a form of HM removal, now allowing your Pokemon to stop being plagued by these attacks because you taught it to a Mon just for time's sake, really regretting the decision. The move reminder also helps in the inverse effect, giving giving level up moves back to Mons, this time wanting mushrooms as currency instead so Wild Paris can have value. We've even got move tutors here as one-time dispensers for specific attacks, which of course grant even more attack variety, although uniquely, in contrast to later games, having the Elemental Beam move tutor just being single in use and exclusively limited to the Kanto starters. Held items, despite not existing before, they arrive to help flesh out the battling scene a bit, and the only problem is how little are actually available, as without any forms of extensive grinding, being items that you can grab off the floor, or ones from Pokedex completion rewards, but ignoring berries, while Pokemon held items, and the game corner, although let's be real, these are pretty easy to grind out, you're only really left with 9 different options for the main story, leaving the impact they have on battle pretty minimal, all things considered, very unfortunately so, at least patched up a bit in postgame. Lastly, for our GBA games, we've got some informative features to help even the worst players keep up with game progression. For instance, we have the help menu locked behind the press of one of the triggers. Here you can get ideas on how to progress the game, and more importantly, just learn the bare bones components of what make up the battling system, or just simply read up on what do. We even get the Teachy TV as a key item to also teach you things, but thankfully these tutorials actually have visual aid, so your 3-year-old son can become a better player than you, as 2 different positives to teach the player that are completely optional. However, the previously on intro isn't as lucky. Here on Startup, you get to see the last couple of things you've done during the last time you've played, which while useful, the fact it always plays upon startup means soft resetting will frequently be plagued with needless time down the toilet for information that you can only realistically speed up without any kind of workaround, which is something, funnily enough, the journal in the Sinnoh games actually had. Which if that wasn't time wasting enough, we do have these new animations every time you use an item just to slow the game down more too. And finally, before moving on, we've got the Switch release of the games to speak on. And while there are a handful of differences between the Switch and GBA releases, here 2 stand above the rest to at least mention. For the positive, beating the game will give you the event items to access Naval Rock and Birth Island. Meaning great, we've got a means to get permanently available Deoxys without Pokemon Bank in the way. The negative though, Gen 5 Plus's nickname censorship was sadly added to the Switch version, meaning unfortunately your very original and creative nickname of fuck is just ignored when entered, going to the default instead. That, gamers, makes up our replayability aspects of Fire Red and Leaf Green. While the game isn't necessarily succeeding on this front, the level curve with its endpoint having been culled back, combined with more available EXP backed even further by a feature we've yet to see, alongside tutorials for those who need it, is improvement. But the most important things to fix, like the main bulk of the level curve, foe diversity, item variety, and better Pokemon variety for you to use, isn't executed in ways that mix up the Kanto experience in positive main game ways, with the remake mainly really assisting with an actual post game and thankfully more side content, which despite being the remake, the definitive version, feels more like a side grade than anything. And once your side content rolls in, we actually have reasons, although not the greatest, to not just immediately wipe your save file and start over. But before that point, let's quickly check up on all the old content so we can see how much new surrounds it. First up is hardly new or a feature, but fishing has been redeemed from its awful Hoenn appearance. Once again, having a single fishing loop to fish up a mon, this time you don't even have to press any buttons, it just happens automatically, rather than the random number of times hell RSE put you through. But with the actual features now, the daycare is up first, and the Route 5 version is unchanged, still having a 1 Pokemon limit, focusing on making EXP easy to get for that singular mon. But now there's a second daycare on 4 Island with a 2 Pokemon limit, so breeding as a feature can finally exist. Of course, locked to post game because Pichu access would ruin the Kanto experience. Also returning is the Safari Zone, which thanks to the Pokedex Rex to unlock post game, will be a hotspot for faster completion time, once again with a visible step counter to make playing here more cohesive. And lastly, for old content, we've got the game corner. I love slot machines! Thankfully, optional, as buying coins is always an option for saving time and encourages grinding the old-fashioned way, which that grind would come in handy if you wanted to use that new thing to print your team on the back of the trainer card, which just looks cool as a partial introduction to the proper new content the OGs lacked entirely. And to start that off, we've got the 2 Island Game Corner, which less than 1% of us have probably ever played since the offering is multiplayer only, made worse due to the only only real reward of relevance being a star for the trainer card, which that being locked off here is another issue entirely. But basically, you've got 2 mini games to pretend to play with up to 5 friends that you don't have across these games and Emerald. Here, you can play a simple game of jump rope with your short kings, or another, pressing the D-pad properly lets Dodrio catch berries for some kind of reaction-based game. The features here are so non-existent in depth that there's honestly nothing to even say about it. So if there's any critique to make, I ask, why is solo play not an option? Actually, no, wait, why is it mandatory that you have to bring your own Pokemon to play this? Of course, jump rope has a height limit, and of course for berry picking, you have to have your own Dodrio. Just make it make sense. From one fumble minigame to another, whoa, it's berry crushing. Brother, it's just button mashing, meaning it's beyond hype. Although probably not worth the time investment, as the inevitable rewards are items that you could just effectively buy instead. With one exception, which is cost redundant, but you've also got to waste precious berries to even play the minigame in the first place. Not to mention that it's also multiplayer locked. So far, the new content's been pretty crummy. Thankfully, that's because we've yet to touch on the new battles at hand. For a start there, we have the VS Seeker, a key item that basically fixes all the issues the Gen 2 trainer rematch system had. As simply using the item will check all generic trainers on screen for a rematch, many having multiple different enhanced schemes and others not. Why it's so good is because once a battle is done, if you're still not satisfied, you can just run 100 measly steps and then pop the item again, re-rolling all visible trainers, including ones that didn't want to battle or ones that you just beat at the cost of less than a minute. It makes getting rematches incredibly fast, so grinding levels and money becomes faster than ever before, and the enhanced teams are the icing on top, with the biggest shame just being how little this key item returns in later games. But rematches don't stop there, as here, the series introduces us to the Elite Four Round 2, basically being the Elite Four run yet again, but they have enhanced teams featuring new mods and a noticeable level bump to make the runs harder, which only needs the post-game plot beat to permanently replace the previous offering as the newest, hardest content in the game, although I don't know where you're getting these levels from. As for the team issues that are solved through this, Lance has a fully evolved team now, and Lorelei has a mono ice type squad. But outside of that, Bruno, Agatha, and Lance all still failed to have mono type teams. Well, in Agatha's case, it's the fact they walked back her poison type team. It's because she's a ghost specialist, so she doesn't have one anymore. Where obviously I can't complain about the game's self-imposed team building restrictions, since even though Ghost and Dragon are doubled in supply, 2 really isn't enough to work with. Still no excuse for Bruno though. 2 Steelixes? Really? Regardless, it should go without saying that this is a great addition, letting the post-game at least have something. Thankfully not alone, as we've got a new battle facility present with the Trainer Tower, or whatever they call it. Here, you pick one of 4 modes to race against the clock in, both overworld play and battles to beat all the foes and set new records in time just because. All while you freak out over scripted shinies against levels that scale to your highest, while getting okay rewards in the process for a post-game feature that you'll likely only ever touch once and never again, leaving us with the final feature being Altering Cave. Basically, this place is just a normal cave, but with the aid of a peripheral device that nobody owned, you'd be able to change the encounter pool from just Zubat to any one of a variety of Johto Pokemon that, unlike the reappearance in Emerald, are exclusively found here, otherwise unobtainable. So, rip Apom specifically because this is never seeing use. Where fellas, our feature list comes to an end. Basically, we bring back all the old content and dump in quite a bit of new stuff, mostly battling content with a side of multiplayer minigames to give you more reasons to keep coming back, mostly on the same save file instead of just booting up a different one because there's nothing left to do, which was something up to this point that the series was in dire need of, although it's a shame that it's just yet not enough. Well, at least Emerald exists to meet that content line, having quite a bit of this intact too, I guess. It's as if it's destiny for Gen 3 games to absolutely excel in the art direction. Fire Red and Leaf Green does exactly what is requested of it in stride. Their graphics are a win, battle looks great with nice and snappy animations, alongside good-looking sprite work. Out of Battle just has a lovely looking world that only really struggles in visual repetition because of the route spam of water and fields. Otherwise, a pixel masterpiece, and obviously I'm gonna glaze the flexing trees that put the Ultra Jungle to shame. And as for the music, it's an obvious win. Loads of remastered tracks in that beautiful Gen 3 sound font, enhancing basically every returning track to various degrees. And new ones that vary from whatever to, oh damn, that's Gen 3 remakes of Johto music? Sign me up! Leaving the entirety of the art direction section as a massive W for presentation overall. The game absolutely kills it. Gamers, pretend to be surprised when I say the plot of Fire Red and Leaf Green is beans, since it's all basically the same with only new tacked on specifically for the new content. As the base game is still the nothing fest where a fatherless child pretends to complete the Pokedex in their quest to collect the gym badges to become the Pokemon League champion, all while dealing with a peak-riding rival and stopping an unfathomably based criminal organization along the way. The new stuff is seen on the Sevi Islands, as your quest here just sends you off to deliver a meteorite turned into a missing person's rescue, while you're just waiting for tech support to get the PCs operational, with some good old-fashioned storytelling through gameplay. Where on the other hand, the post-game sees you come back to the Sevi Islands to gather 2 rocks to enable a machine to trade out of region, all while you fight the remnants of Team Rocket, who, unaware of Giovanni disbanding the team, are causing trouble across the islands, with an angry generic admin swearing to revive Team Rocket, loosely connecting the plot of the Johto games to the games that came before, uneventfully so. While that covers the very non-existent plot, what about the paper-thin characters with zero depth? While things are mostly still nothing, we do have loads of extra dialogue addressing important characters in varying detail to flesh them out a bit more, all kept in the Fame Checker key item once you've seen them, just in case you needed a quick lore update or something. Meaning we went from basically blank slates to cardboard cutouts, which is definitely an upgrade, which cardboard doesn't describe just the characters, but the narrative as a whole. And at the end, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green are both excessively hype and dreadfully insulting as remakes. Utterly fantastic with its minuscule story enhancements, the massive mechanical overhaul that makes both the gameplay feel better and provides much more personality to Mons, alongside a whole new postgame, the relaxation of the level curve no matter how small, and of course art direction that makes the experience more fire. Sadly fumbling in a lot more aspects than one would like, such as the Pokedex hurdle to access postgame, the Kanto Pokedex having 0 expansions despite new Pokemon existing, the inability to alter boss teams with any kind of impact, the pitiful diversity of items throughout the world, and the realistic datedness of the gameplay mechanics really leave the games feel like they're missing their it factor, especially as a remake. Because as a remake, the games are really suffering from not being able to differentiate itself from the originals. Like, sick. We've got the Gen 3 mechanics and the game looks absolutely beautiful. So what's holding it back? Well, Pokemon variety is essentially untouched, a damn near total absence of 2 typings that didn't exist before, the level curve still demanding you to grind extensively if you want to run teams above 4, and just generally too samey feeling. At least Heart Gold Soul Silver massively overhauled their back half, with new mons available throughout the Johto section, with far more in the Kanto art, all on top of a massive content increase. At least Orast had loads of new mons to use, an over-centralizing battle mechanic, a healthy inclusion of a typing that previously didn't exist, a proper post-game, and of course 3 gens worth of battle system reworks. And BDSP? And at this point you can see the issue. Outside of the additions here and there, the game will usually play either very similar or exactly like the originals, just without the Gen 1 jank in battle, leaving the player wishing these remakes would have just come after Gen 3 to give it more of a purpose. Needless to say, these games aren't bad remakes. Obviously they're improvements, but absolutely they should not be labeled as the gold standard, as their remake touch doesn't provide nearly as much help to the game as it would like. Meaning now, let's get the reviews in. For a score of 1 to 5, it's a reasonable 3. All the gameplay aspects come together to give it a fine vibe, nothing crazy, nothing rewarding to play through, but a possible good time. As for the question of should you play it, surprisingly, this is going to be a yes, mostly piggybacking off the previous yes of Red and Blue. Alongside the fact that the other Kanto remakes of Let's Go don't force this game out of relevance, since there is exclusive content here. And as for a personal recommendation, this one has been falling off for me quite a bit. While favored for the beauty that is just looking at the game and listening to it, like just playing literally any other game will be more interesting, especially when the games that otherwise struggle similarly to Fire Red and Leaf Green can also have a save editor cut out all the grinding aspects that actually let me use fun teams in those games, which thanks to the team building restrictions is something that Fire Red and Leaf Green doesn't really do. It just offers a quick game to plow through and be done. Regardless, that's all for me today. Fellas and fellettes, thank you for watching, and until next time, I think it's time to play through Leaf Green again! Alright, Venusaur, starter, duh. Fearow, sure, I suppose I need a flyer. Slowbro, yeah, surfers are needed and psychics are broken. Ooh, I have a fun idea. What about a dark type? Oh, there aren't any? Not even a Sneasel, but it's only got special stab moves? Brother, what is the point?